Why was the Battle of the Alamo important? In February 1836, an outnumbered band of Texan independence fighters faced a Mexican army in what would become one of the most storied conflicts in American history, the Battle of the Alamo. Although they lost the battle, the Texan fighters' final stand became a historic symbol of resistance and freedom, immortalized in the famous battle cry, "Remember the Alamo." Here's a look back at why this fascinating battle was important, militarily, politically, and symbolically. The Battle of the Alamo took place from February to March 1836. By that point, fighting had been ongoing for months between Mexican troops under the command of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and Texan forces seeking independence from Mexico. The Mexicans had already won several victories, and Santa Anna was determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. The small garrison at the Alamo, a former Spanish mission near the town of San Antonio, consisted of about 200 Texan volunteers, including some 300 newly recruited soldiers who were in the process of training. Among them were legendary figures like Davy Crockett, a former U.S. congressman, frontiersman, and skilled hunter, and Jim Bowie, a larger-than-life pioneer and expert with a knife. Of the defenders, around half were American. The rest were Tejanos, or Texas-born Mexicans who wanted independence from their homeland. Also included in the mix were a handful of African Americans, most of whom were enslaved people who had escaped captivity. These ragtag rebels stood in stark contrast to the Mexican army, which at full strength numbered some 4,000 men, though it was reduced to roughly 1,800 by the time it arrived at the Alamo. Still, the defenders were vastly outnumbered, but they were also well positioned. The Alamo was surrounded by sturdy stone walls up to 18 feet high, which would have made it very difficult for the Mexican army to storm the compound. However, the Texans soon realized they didn't have enough supplies to mount an effective defense, and so on February, they sent a letter to the Mexican commander asking for terms of surrender. Santa Anna responded by offering the Texans prisoners of war status and safe conduct back to the United States if they laid down their arms. But he made it clear that he would take no prisoners if they resisted. Colonel Travis, who commanded the Texan forces, rejected the offer. In response, Santa Anna ordered his artillery to begin bombarding the Alamo, pounding the walls until they were breached. Then he sent in infantry to flush out the defenders. What followed was a 2-day battle of hand-to-hand combat, house to house and yard to yard. By the end, all of the Texan soldiers inside the Alamo were dead. Although there were some survivors among the Tejano population of San Antonio, these individuals were given the choice of renouncing their allegiance to the Texan cause or being killed. Ultimately, only 5 men emerged from the compound alive. Santa Anna permitted them to leave with news of the Alamo's fall. It wasn't long before those words spread beyond Texas borders. In fact, a letter detailing the events reached the office of the New York Sun within 2 weeks of the battle's conclusion. The paper published the account on April 1836, where it caught the attention of one James Greenleaf Muungathi Watt, an editor who would help shape the narrative of the Alamo for generations to come. He wrote a stirring editorial which concluded, "Thus perished all the Texan heroes who made their last stand at the Alamo, save one. May the Almighty God damn the memory of Santa Anna." That article helped turn the memory of the Alamo into a rallying cry for independence and inspired many more young American volunteers to join the fight. And that brings us to one of the most important aspects of the Alamo, its symbolic importance. The Alamo is important because it galvanized the revolution that had until then been limping along with little momentum. Prior to the battle, most of the action in Texas had been limited to raids and skirmishes. There simply wasn't much appetite among the settlers for a full-scale war against Mexico. But the massacre at the Alamo changed everything. To many, the heroism of the defenders personified the struggle for liberty and autonomy. From that point forward, the cry of "Remember the Alamo" became a battle cry used to inspire Texans to fight for independence. Indeed, 6 weeks after the Alamo fell, a force of around 400 Texan volunteers marched to the nearby town of Gonzales and decisively defeated a larger Mexican army. Momentum for independence was building, and soon after, on April, the Texan army achieved its greatest victory of the war at the Battle of San Jacinto, where Santa Anna himself was taken prisoner. So how did such a decisive battle become so significant? Part of the answer lies in the battle's aftermath. Because the losing side prevailed in the war, there were no official accounts of the battle from a Texan perspective. Instead, the story of the Alamo, as we know it today, is largely based on one source, the personal narrative of Almiron Roberts, a soldier in the battle who survived and later wrote a first-hand account of the event. But the story really began to take shape decades later when historians began to weave the battle into the broader narrative of American exceptionalism. For example, one version of the story has it that Santa Anna offered the Texans at the Alamo a noble opportunity to surrender and save their lives, but that the brave frontiersmen refused, choosing instead to fight to the death. This portrayal not only ignores the reality of slavery in Texas at the time, but it also feeds into a mythology of the Old West that helped justify American expansion across the continent. Today, the memory of the Alamo continues to be invoked by right-wing politicians looking to cast themselves as defenders of Texan values. For example, during the 2022 legislative session, Republican members of the Texas House invoked the Alamo in support of a bill banning abortion. The claim was that the spirit of the Alamo was one of self-sacrifice, and that allowing women to obtain abortions was akin to giving up without a fight. This appropriation co-opted the historic meaning of the Alamo, twisting it to suit a political agenda. Yet despite its co-opting by conservative groups, the legacy of the Alamo remains a powerful one. It represents a moment when ordinary people stood up to tyranny and sacrificed everything to win their freedom. Whether that sacrifice was truly heroic or merely tragic is up for debate. But one thing is for sure, it played a pivotal role in shaping the history of Texas. For more insights into pivotal historical moments, stay tuned for more information. Why was the Battle of the Alamo important? Although they lost the battle, the Texan fighters' final stand became a historic symbol of resistance and freedom. To learn more about another historical event that shaped our world, watch the video on your screen. Or check out the series for a deep dive into the history of the Civil War.